A treat. I'm a Richard Skipper fan. I would come to anything he did. But Richard, this show is the best you've ever done. You don't need to be a fan. If you've never heard of Richard Skipper, come see this show. It's amazing.
You share a little thought about the show? How did you like it?
Very good.
You enjoy it?
Yes.
Do you know any of the songs?
I don't know, sorry.
Well, you will now, huh?
Yes.
So moving and heartfelt. I felt so joyous and full of life after seeing the show. Thank you, Richard.
Hi there, Richard. It was a fantastic performance. I loved every minute. It was happy and joyful. Perfect for a night like tonight.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Kirsch. I'm the host of the theater podcast Backstage Babble, and I'm delighted to be taking over Richard Skipper Celebrates for the day as we celebrate the man who deserves it most of all, Richard Skipper. He's brought us so much entertainment over these past pandemic years, and I'm honored to be here interviewing him and shining the spotlight on him. If you couldn't already tell from those wonderful introductory videos, the show that we'll be celebrating today is Hello, Dolly, specifically its 60th anniversary, which just took place, and Richard's amazing show to celebrate that anniversary, which will be happening for us New York audiences on February 11th at 7 p.m. at the Laurie Beachman Theater, and I encourage all of you to attend it. Richard has so many connections with Hello, Dolly, his long friendship and impersonation of Carol Channing, his website, Call on Dolly, which features interviews with stars and supporting players from almost every major production of the show, and of course, this new solo show, which combines clips from, trivia about, and performances of the songs of the show for what I hear is a delightful evening. Now, I try to do as much research as possible for these interviews, but I think it would take me years to know even half as much about Hello, Dolly as Richard Skipper does. So without further ado, let's bring on the man himself, Richard Skipper.
Hello, Charles. I'm so glad that you're doing this, and thank you.
Yes, thank you for asking me. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you suggested this, I was blown away, so thank you.
Yes. Well, I'd love to start us off by asking what your first attraction to Hello, Dolly was. Was it through a cast album or through a production you saw? How did it start?
Well, there's an evolution to how I came to Hello, Dolly. First of all, it was my introduction to Carol Channing. And my introduction to Carol began not through Carol, actually, but through Lucille Ball. There's an episode of The Lucy Show in which Lucille Ball is impersonating Carol Channing. And I'm a few years older than you, Charles, but I grew up at a time where there were three networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And those three networks were always vying for the largest demographic that they could get. So I grew up watching television with my parents and my grandparents. We grew up in a television household. And I was that kid that mimicked everything I saw on television. So obviously, after I saw Lucille Ball's impersonation of Carol Channing, there I was in school the next day doing my impersonation of Lucille Ball impersonating Carol Channing, not knowing, believe it or not, that Carol Channing was an honest to God, real live person. And then shortly after that, she did a television special with Pearl Bailey, which I saw, and I was smitten. I fell in love with her, and I used to get the TV guide. And those of you that are watching that are older in my demographic, the baby boomers, will remember the TV guide coming out every week. Still comes out, but we lived by the TV guide because that was our only source of knowing what was going to be on TV. We didn't have social media. So I would get the TV guide and I would go through it like I was researching a term paper. And I would go through and I would search and search and search. And if I saw anything that Carol Channing was going to be appearing on, I would absolutely tune in. And then it was in 1971 that the movie Hello, Dolly was sold to television and was shown on CBS for the first time. And of course, that was the first time, believe it or not, that I was hearing the score of Hello, Dolly. And of course, it was very different from Carol Channing's version. But I know there are a lot of naysayers out there when it comes to Barbra Streisand and the movie version. But let's face it, nobody could sing those songs like Barbra Streisand. And of course, I fell in love with Jerry Herman. And then that escalated to my love of Jerry Herman. The very first show that I ever did when I was 13 years old was MAME with our community theater. And I was off and running. And that's how it all began.
Yes. And right behind you, there's a photo of you with the great lady herself, Carol Channing. And how did you two first meet?
Well, I mean, the first time that I saw Carol Channing in person, I moved to New York in 1979. And shortly after I moved to New York, Lynn Fontaine had passed away. And they were having a memorial at the Lynn Fontaine Theater. And I read in the paper that Carol Channing was going to be there. So I know it's going to sound like I'm a stalker. I went to the memorial and there I was. And I'm standing in front of the theater. And Carol Channing, Helen Hayes, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. are standing there.
Wow.
And I hear Carol Channing tell Helen Hayes that they have a table at Sardi's and they're going directly after the memorial. I ran to Sardi's. I've never been there before. And I said to the maitre d' that I would like to get a table next to Carol Channing, that I was a friend of hers. Well, obviously, I knew she was coming there, so he believed me. And he sat me next to her. So years later, and I just sat there and observed. Years later, put it out in the universe, Carol and I became very good friends. And we were having lunch at the Boathouse in Central Park. And I told her this story. And she said, I knew you looked familiar. But I never would have thought that the relationship would go to the extent that it did get to. But years later, I was that kid, as I mentioned, who used to get up and perform at parties and open mics as Carol, many times not in costume. As a matter of fact, if anyone had ever said that that would have been part of my future, I never would have believed that either. But when she came to Broadway for the last revival of Dolly, a friend of mine suggested that I put together a show about her. And he said, if you don't do this show, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. And my first thought was, what if she doesn't like what I do? Because it really mattered to me.
Right.
And I didn't want to go out and do something that she would be bothered by or that she would be offended by or anything along those lines. But I started doing a lot of research and I started putting together a show. My very first show in New York as Carol was a show called Carol Channing's Broadway. And I did songs not only from her career, but certain songs that it would have been fun if she had ever performed them on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And as I was putting the show together, and this is my teaser, I got the opportunity to perform the show for Carol, and the rest is history. And I talk about that in the upcoming show. So that's all I want to say about that for now.
Yes. And for you, are Carol Channing and Dolly Gallagher-Levi inextricably linked, or are there other actresses who you think have come up to her level in their ability to play that role?
Well, the thing about Dolly Levi is that, Carol Cook once jokingly said that that an orangutan could play the part. She said that if any actress that doesn't that comes down those stairs in that role, if they don't elicit the kind of response that that number elicits, it's time for that actress to get out of the business. There is only one Carol Channing. There will only be, throughout history, one Carol Channing. But what is so unique about this role is that so many women, and as we say, a few good men, have played this role and have made it their own. Some actresses sing the song better than other actresses. Some actresses have the comedic chops that are better than other actresses. Some actresses, capture the pathos of Dolly Levi better than other actresses. And then once in a while, somebody will come along that captures all of those elements and makes it uniquely her own. So I have seen so many Dollys over the years, and I have never seen any that really didn't hit a bullseye.
Mm, that is wonderful. That is. And if you could dream cast an actress who has yet to take on the role in a production of Hello, Dolly, alive or dead, who would it be?
I've got a couple. Queen Latifah.
Mm.
I would also love to see Reba McEntire do Dolly, because I think there was talk years ago, believe it or not, with Dolly Parton doing a country western version of Hello, Dolly as a television special. Unfortunately, it never happened. She recorded some of the songs, and there's actually a clip of Dolly Parton on YouTube singing Hello, Dolly. So I can imagine it coming off. They were going to set it in Nashville instead of Yonkers in New York. I could see it happening. I'd love to see Queen Latifah do it, Reba McEntire. And who would you like to see do it?
That is a hard question. I don't know. I think I was lucky enough to see Bette Midler, who's above me, and Bernadette Peters in the role. And those, aside from Barbara Streisand in the movie, are the only Dollys I've ever seen. And I would love to see maybe in a few years Laura Benanti do it. I think she's so talented and could do wonderfully with that role.
Absolutely. And did you see Donna Murphy do it?
I didn't know. I'm sure she was wonderful too.
I loved her, Dolly. I mean, Donna Murphy, to me, she was that actress that captured all the elements and truly made it her own.
Right. Now, not many people would probably know what I was referring to if I called this show Dolly, a Damned Exasperating Woman. But of course, that was the original title.
That was the original working title of the show.
And for those of us who don't know, tell us how the musical of Hello, Dolly came about.
Well, it started, believe it or not, in 1835. And it was a play by John Oxenford. And it was about two clerks. It was called A Day Well Spent. And these two clerks go on a spree in London, and they spend the day trying to avoid their boss. Elements of that, as you will know, went through Dolly as well. And then in 1842, it became He Wants to Go on a Fling. That's the American translation of the German translation. And that was by a playwright named John Nestory. And Thornton Wilder was a real devotee of his. And he, it was 1938, that he created The Merchant of Yonkers. It was a huge hit It lasted 39 performances. But one thing that he created in The Merchant of Yonkers was the character of Dolly Gallagher Levi. And it was Thornton Wilder's friend, Ruth Gordon, who suggested that he take that character and expand her to make her the central character. And that was the evolution of The Matchmaker, which came along in 1954. So Thornton Wilder had always thought in the back of his mind that it would make a great musical. So move ahead to 1961, and there were two musicals on Broadway that will feature as part of this storyline. Do you know what those musicals are?
I don't know.
Milk and Honey and Carnival.
Mm.
Now, and I say these two musicals because, first of all, Carnival, Michael Stewart, Bob Merrill, and Gower Champion were all working on this musical. And it was that team that David Merrick wanted to bring to Dolly Levi, A Damned Exasperating Woman. However, Gower Champion and Bob Merrill didn't get along too well. And so Bob Merrill said that he would not work on the musical. So it was at that point that Michael Stewart went to his dear friend, Jerry Herman, who had Milk and Honey on Broadway, told him about this idea, and said that David Merrick was going to be looking for a composer. So he met with David Merrick. He very excitedly sat down and began to compose the score for Ethel Merman. When he was 15 years old, Jerry Herman had seen Ethel Merman in Annie Get Your Gun. And he said if the day ever arrived that he would get the opportunity to create a musical for her, he was going to do it. However, when they approached Ethel Merman in 1963, she said, "Forget it, fellas. I've spent my entire life in hotel rooms and dressing rooms, and I have no intention of coming out of retirement and doing this show." So he was crushed. But then he got the idea that Nanette Fabre would be perfect in the role. And Gower Champion and Nanette Fabre had worked together on a show called Make-A-Wish, for which she had won a Tony Award. So, but he wanted her to come in and audition for him. Now, I won't use the words that she used, according to what Marge Champion told me. She said, "There's no way I'm going to come in and audition for you. You know what I can do." So at the time, Carol Channing was doing The Millionaires out in Long Island, and Marge Champion suggested Carol Channing to audition to come in and play Dolly. Now, think about this. Carol Channing had a big hit with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it had been almost 15, 20 years. She had continued to work, but she had not had a big hit on the level of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in all these years. Gower Champion, who was responsible for bringing Carol Channing to Broadway in Linden Ear, did not want Carol in the role because he felt that she was too identified with Lorelei Lee and that audiences would not be able to buy her in any other role. You see, she had adapted that character, even in her nightclub act, in her television appearances. She had essentially become Lorelei Lee. So for him to convince audiences that she was Dolly Levi as opposed to Lorelei Lee, he felt was going to be a very tough sell. However, they went to see The Millionaires. They liked what they saw, and they worked with Carol on a few of Dolly's monologues. She came in and she auditioned with the money speech, you know, money, 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 Mr. Van de Gulger's money, and she got the part. And that's how it all happened.
Yes. And I know that Jerome Robbins and Charles Strauss were two more names that were attached to or offered the project at different points. And who were some of those other kind of would-be creative team members
Hal Prince.
along the way?
And Hal Prince said he hated the song, Hello, Dolly. He said, get rid of the song. No one's ever going to sing it. famous last words. He wanted the song to go. So Hal Prince, Charles Strauss did come in to Detroit, and he worked on the show. Contrary to rumors that are out there, he did not write any of the songs for Hello Dolly. And I interviewed Charles Strauss about this, and very much the first act and the end of the first act, which is pivotal, and the beginning of the second act is all Charles Strauss.
Mm. And do you think it was for that reason that the musical didn't work initially in its tryout? Because it's hard to imagine the musical that you and I love so much not being a hit right away.
No, I think the reason was, and it's very interesting. Jerry said that from the moment that Gower started working on this, the pivotal moment for him was the Hello Dolly number. And so all of his time and energy went into that number. And they spent 4 weeks rehearsing that number in the basement of the Mark Hellinger Theater, which is now a church. So when they got to Detroit, there was not really a show there. The first act ended with Horace Van de Gelder singing Penny in My Pocket. There were incidental characters. The arc of Cornelius and Irene Malloy was not really in place. There were a lot of issues in terms of the book that were not in place. And it wasn't until Charles Strauss suggested ending the first act with the song Before the Parade Passes By. He wrote a version Before the Parade Passes By, which was not used in the show. The song that Jerry Herman wrote is the closing song for Act 1. But that song, as Carol always said, was the spine of what the show was all about, because it really captured the feeling. Charles Strauss said, is the show about Horace? Is the show about Dolly? Is the show about the secondary characters? The focus of the show needs to be Dolly Levi. And of course, the title song, Hello Dolly. Let's make the show about Dolly. So when they were in Detroit, they had their first preview on November 18th, 1963. And on that Friday, Kennedy was assassinated. And that put a pall over the entire show, over the entire nation. And what was supposed to happen next was their next appearance was going to be at the National Theater in Washington, D.C. And John and Jackie were slated to be their opening night. They were very dear friends of Carol. So it had this whole pall over this. And they're trying to create this happy-go-lucky musical against one of the most tragic experiences in the history of the United States. And, and then as the show was taking shape at the National Theater, on New Year's Eve, Gower Champion came in and said to the company, I want you to hear this song. And it was Hello Dolly by Louis Armstrong, which was very different from the way it's played in the show, as you know. Right. But they knew that song was going to, even though the song would not come out for several months, that song would catapult them over the top. And it did.
What a great story. And what to you makes Hello Dolly the pinnacle of that golden era of Broadway?
Well, it's very interesting because the United States was going through major changes. The Vietnam War was going on. The civil rights movement was going on. The women's rights movement, the gay liberation movement was going on. The music was changing. The Beatles arrived just a few weeks after Hello Dolly opened. So it was against this ever-changing landscape. And I think that it was a throwback to what musical comedy was all about. And I think that Jerry Herman's music was all about optimism and the excitement of this. And of course, when Carol Channing left to do her own tour, because in those days, and I want to give a shout out to Louis Stadlin, because he has a new book out about life on the road. And I went to see him last night at the Drama Bookshop, and he talked about this. There was a time where major stars went on the road. Carol Channing always said, if you take it out among the people, they will bring it to New York. And so when Carol left to do the national tour, David Merrick got the bright idea of bringing a movie star in to step into her shoes. And that was when Ginger Rogers came into the show. And then when Ginger Rogers left, it was Martha Raye, Betty Grable, Pearl Bailey, Phyllis Diller, and eventually Ethel Merman came out of her retirement, making it at that time the longest running show in Broadway history.
Hmm. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Pearl Bailey coming in as a replacement, because that would have been a historic precedent at the time to replace an all-white cast with an all-black cast. And what was that decision-making process like for the creative team?
Well, I had the good pleasure of interviewing Saul Sheckman, who did the orchestrations for the Pearl Bailey production. And the way that he tells the story was that, now the Weislers, are famous for what they call stunt casting.
Yes.
But David Merrick had it to a science. And so as all these actresses were being considered for Dolly, David Merrick went to see Pearl Bailey's nightclub act in Washington, D.C. And someone suggested to him, that's your next Dolly Levi. And all of a sudden, a light bulb went off. And he thought, an all African American company. Those days, they didn't say an all African American company. It was an all Black company. And so he came up with this idea with her and Cab Calloway. And so think about this. The show closed on a Sunday night with Betty Grable. And then on Tuesday, it opened with a completely different cast. Of course, they had done it in Washington, D.C. The show was already running like a well-oiled machine. Mm-hmm. And by the time it came to Broadway, it was major. And nothing like this had ever been done before. And going back to when the original production was getting ready to come to Broadway, with the assassination of John Kennedy, strangely enough, when they were doing the all African American company, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Mm. And as a matter of fact, when that happened, Pearl Bailey had to make a decision as to whether or not the company would go on that night. And of course, she felt that it was important that they do go on, that the world needed to go on, and that we cannot stop that, as tragic as this was. And so one of the other things, all of the actresses who played Dolly always did a curtain speech. Pearl Bailey and Cab Calloway, they would do their nightclub act on stage after the show was over. And sometimes this would go on for 45 minutes. Sometimes it would go longer. And the actors would just stand on the stage as this was going on. Eventually, Actors Equity stepped in and let the actors leave the stage. The audience sat there. I mean, there's no way that something like that would happen in today's world because of the unions and everything else. But the audience got more than they bargained for when they showed up for the Pearl Bailey Hello, Dolly.
It's true. And have you had the chance to see archival recordings of any or all of these original replacement dollies?
I mean, there's not a lot of footage left out there, but more and more, thanks to YouTube, people are finding things like with Phyllis Diller. Phyllis Diller, when she did the role, she really wanted to be taken seriously. And one of the reviews said, if you're expecting to see Fang, stay home. And it really hurt her at the box office because people wanted to see this over-the-top, caricature of Dolly with Phyllis Diller. but that wasn't the case. So it became, a difficult thing for, for Phyllis Diller and her company. And she really, was only in the show for a very short time. But the interesting thing is that when Phyllis Diller was doing it, that's when the movie opened. And for the first time, the movie, it had never happened before, that a major motion picture opens and the show is on Broadway. And Danny Locken, who was playing Barnaby Tucker, was also in the movie version.
Mm. And speaking of unique candidates for the role of Dolly, I love this phrase, "a few good men," that you use to describe the Danny LaRue and Leroy Reams productions. And Leroy Reams, of course, can be seen at your upcoming show
That's
at the
right.
Laurie Beachman Theater. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about how those two productions came to be and how the show changes with a male at the center.
Well, it's very interesting because David Merrick was, especially after Pearl Bailey, he was always looking for unique ways to keep the show going. There was talk of George Burns and Jack Benny doing it, with Jack Benny doing Dolly in drag, as we know. That never came to fruition. I've heard rumors, nothing has been corroborated, that Liberace was even considered to play Dolly. But he went to London, and Danny LaRue was a very famous, well-known pantomime performer. And he wanted Danny LaRue to do the show. And Lorna Dallas, do you know Lorna?
Yes, yes, she's a great performer.
She was his Irene Malloy. And they opened outside of London to rave reviews. And then as they were bringing it into the West End, he got cold feet. He didn't think that audiences would accept him without doing all of the camp elements. And he got campier and campier, and it hurt the box office. It was a little bit too much. All he needed to do was play it as it was done. Now, as far as Leroy is concerned, Leroy had done La Cage aux Folles at the Wick Theater, and Marilyn Wick said, "What do you want to do as a follow-up?" And he said, "I've always wanted to do Dolly Levi." And Leroy Reams, as you know, has directed practically every great actress in the role. Madeline Kahn, Joanne Worley, Carol Channing, and there are many others. So he did Dolly Levi opposite Louis Statler, and I went down to see the production. And he played it, for lack of a better word, straight. And he was brilliant. He was absolutely wonderful. And I'm so thrilled that I got a chance to see him in the role.
Yes. And you've mentioned several times throughout this interview the interviews that you've conducted for your Call on Dolly website oral history project. And how did the idea to create that first come to you?
Carol Channing.
Mm.
Yeah. I was visiting Carol out in California, and we were talking one night, and she said, "Richard, you know more about Hello Dolly than Jerry Herman and me put together. You should write a book." And I started at that time putting it together. And when I was out in California, someone had suggested, I was in Palm Springs, someone suggested that I get in touch with Roberta Olden, who was the assistant to Ginger Rogers.
Mm.
And I called Roberta Olden, and we met, and she shared with me Ginger Rogers' mother's journals. She kept very detailed journals of Ginger Rogers' opening night, her closing night, all of the celebrities that came to visit the show, a real detailed version of the show. And so I got a lot of information there. And then she said, "You need to speak with this person." And then I would speak to that person. They would say, "You need to speak with this person." And little by little, that's how it happened. Well, doesn't it
Yeah,
happen with you as well?
it does. It does. It sounds familiar.
And it just it's like a snowball, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I was working on this, and I wanted to do it I wanted a book to come out to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Hello Dolly. And then, and then shortly after that, it was announced that Bette Midler was coming to Broadway. And I thought I'd wait until after that happened. And then it wasn't long after that that COVID hit, and I got derailed from everything. And now here we are. It's the 60th anniversary. I've decided to put this show together. And who knows? Maybe the book will come out. Maybe it won't. I'm just going to take this ride and see where it takes me.
Yes, and everyone should visit the website callondolly.com to find all those interviews on
Thank you.
the
Thank you.
internet. They're
I
fascinating.
think that Dan Pardo is here. And Dan Pardo is the musical director.
Hi, everybody.
Huh?
Hi, Charles. Hi, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm in the middle of 4th Avenue, in between rehearsals, but I was just enjoying that fascinating conversation between the two of you. What a joyous chat you're having. Celebrating one of my.
Charles, you take over.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Dan. And
Of
this
course.
seems like a perfect segue to start talking about the show itself,
Mhm.
on Dolly Show. And Dan, how did you first get involved in this project?
So our fabulous director, James Beeman, and I have known each other for about a decade. We crossed paths when I was on staff at the Goodspeed Opera House. I saw him in Annie Get Your Gun, and then we did a production of Maine together, which is, as you know, another Jerry Herman score. So he knew that I love Jerry Herman, and he kind of played matchmaker, if you'll forgive the pun. And we had a Zoom call that was just really joyful and positive, and we got together at the studio and started creating, and it's been a really joyous collaboration over the last couple months. Fast and furious, Richard.
Yes. Yeah, it's been great.
And what was the process like for the two of you of putting together the set list for this show?
Dan?
I mean, obviously, we wanted to focus on the canon of Hello Dolly as a celebratory event of the show, but we also wanted to kind of take a step back. And part of what makes Hello Dolly such a timeless piece is the optimism, the positivity, and the theme of really kind of stepping into your own and taking charge of your own life. And as Richard has been someone who is a facilitator, who kind of, loves to, much like yourself, Charles, kind of not attach yourself to other people, but kind of become, someone who is a member of the community and making things happen, making connections happen, introducing people to other people. Richard has not taken a moment for himself to really step into his own shoes and tell his own story. And so we wanted to be a celebration of the show, but also of himself as a performer, because he's a damn good one. And so we had obviously the collection of Dolly songs, also ones that are kind of tangential to Dolly, which, written for Ethel Merman, but not necessarily used in the traditional performances of the shows, and then a couple other ones which just seem to be on message. But it's, as far as the set list, it's pretty straightforward. We haven't done anything terribly surprising, but I think there's a lot of joy and love in what we've created.
I'm sure there is. And Richard, what has it been like for you to step back into the spotlight post-pandemic and having this experience?
Well, it's very interesting because the lyrics of the songs, and it's all about life and being part of, the experience of life. Getting back to Louis Stadlin last night, he read an excerpt from his book where he talks about the message of Dolly. And as I'm sitting there listening to him, and I'm going, this is what this show is about. But it's really taking chances. It's stepping out of your comfort zone. It's getting out there and saying, I'm rejoining the human race. Or as one of the other songs says, world, take me back. I'm ready to get back out there again. And that, this experience of doing this, working with Dan and James, what I really love about both of them is, Liza Minnelli once said that as much as she loves being in front of an audience, the real excitement happens in the rehearsal studio, because that's when ideas are bouncing around and we go, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do this. Let's try that. No, that doesn't really necessarily work. And that's exciting to me. So I love the true collaborative process, and I couldn't ask for a better team.
I think one of the reasons why this production, this show is so fun is because so much of it is almost like a rehearsal process. There's a lot of the format of the show is in limbo. It feeds off of the audience. There's a great deal of the structure that has to do with audience questions, because Richard's such a wellspring of knowledge when it comes to Hello, Dolly. We wanted to give him the opportunity to be spontaneous. And the other day when we had our first performance, we kind of just threw an audible and went down a certain path and started singing a song because it was kind of the right moment to do so. And in that way, every performance feels like a bit of a rehearsal in a joyous way. At least it does for me.
Absolutely, me too.
And for everyone out there who wants to support the show even more than by just buying a ticket to the upcoming performance, you can donate to Richard's Kickstarter for the upcoming planned tour of the show. And if you could both talk a little bit about the plans for that, that would be great.
Well, it's very interesting because I've never done a Kickstarter before in my life. But the fact of the matter is, over the last 3 years, doing a podcast, and you know this better than anyone, Charles, we don't make money at this. So it's, as a matter of fact, it's cost me a lot to do what I've done as far as the equipment and everything that I need to do that, just to put it out there. And so through Angela De Niro and Erin Califf, who are two phenomenal people in my life, they came up with the idea of doing the Kickstarter, and they have been so creative. We've got mugs, we have a Hello Dolly calendar, we're doing shout outs in the show where I'm singing their names out, a dinner at my house. There are so many things that people will get. It's not just like throw me some money and I'll run with it. I want to give something back as well. And the hope is that after February 11th, which by the way is your mom's birthday,
Yes,
so I'm saying shout out to your mom. Our hope is that we'll be able to take this on the road, and we'll be able to take this beyond. But that's basically what the Kickstarter is there to help us do, so that we can get this with us. I just want to say that this is from James Beeman, and he's just tuning in. James, if you're able to pop on. Yes, but no, it's just been the best experience.
That is wonderful. And you both mentioned the genius of Jerry Herman and your experiences with him. And Richard, I know you knew him personally as well. And what do you think it is that makes him such a great composer in the musical theater canon?
Jerry Herman never lost that optimism. It comes through every song he wrote. And he lived, from the moment that he started composing as around your age, Charles, that excitement of the theater was always there. And when he wrote these characters, they were all bigger than life characters. These were all, if you look at all the characters, it was all about life. It's all about the celebration of life. And to me, that's what makes his music resonate so deeply with me. Dan?
No, absolutely. There are other composers who, write larger than life characters. Andrew Lloyd Webber's written about Jesus and the Phantom and, Norma Desmond. But, there's kind of a heaviness to all of all of that information. Jerry's, it is so vivacious. It's so optimistic. It's so joyful. And, nothing he writes is ever an intellectual exercise. It leads with the heart. It feels good to play. It feels right to sing. It's the type of, score. Not only is it hummable, but it makes you feel better at the end of the day than you did at the beginning. And, there are many reasons to enjoy theater, but I always think that's a valuable endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And Dan, I don't want to keep you too long from your rehearsal, but I would love to ask you the same question I asked Richard about, is there a dream Dolly for you that you would love to see role?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I owe you an answer.
Well, if I may interrupt for a moment.
Yes, please.
You did work with an incredible Dolly.
I did. So I was an assistant conductor for the 2012, 2000, yeah, or 2013 production at Goodspeed with Clea Blackhurst, who has become a dear friend. And wow, talk about someone who could sing that score and find the humor and have a giant heart. In my conversations with Richard, there are many different facets to Dolly, and it's almost like playing a video game where you see different attributes that kind of branch into different directions. It's like, oh, this is a comedy Dolly. This is an emotionally satisfying Dolly. And I feel like Clea was like bullseye, dead in the center, had a little bit of everything, and it was, and on a personal level, just really gracious and beautiful to work with too. So that was great. But I think one of the reasons why I like Dolly is that a terrific Dolly could come from anywhere, and it can surprise you in a way. Because when something is about affirming life, that's something that we all have in common, and it's a story that so many people can tell and tell beautifully. So surprise me with the next Dolly, and I'm sure that we'll all be better for it.
Well, I will mention very quickly, and then move on to James, that Jodie Benson is about to play Dolly in Florida. And Imelda Staunton is going to be doing Dolly in London this summer. And there are productions of Dolly. I get Google alerts for Hello Dolly, and daily, whether it be high schools or performing arts centers, Dolly. There's not a night that there's some woman and sometimes a man coming down those stairs somewhere in the world playing Dolly Levi.
All right, I just came up with an answer, Charles. I want a Stephanie D'Abruzzo Dolly, and I wanted her to do it without the puppet. I think she can sing the hell out of it. I think she is such a good soul, and she has great comedy chops with all her comedy work with Avenue Q and Sesame Street and the like. So plus there needs to be more Stephanie D'Abruzzo on Broadway and elsewhere.
Amen. I agree.
Great choice. And James, thank you for joining us. James is the director of Richard's upcoming show. And James,
yes.
Yes. And how did you first get involved with Hello Dolly and with Richard Skipper?
Well, I mean, Hello Dolly, my parents were theater people. And when my father passed away, may he rest in peace, he left 2,000 original Broadway cast albums. He collected them. And he was a set designer, and he would collect these albums and he would play them in the paint studio while he was painting drops and scenery. And I was cleaning buckets and stuff as a child. And so I was surrounded by these things. Plus, my mother grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn, in the 40s and 50s. And then in college, she became friends with Christina Crawford, through whom she became friends with Joan Crawford. And Joan Crawford had seats in every theater on Broadway for herself and her husband, Al Steele, who was the president of Pepsi Cola. And so she sent my mother to see everything. And my mother saw the original cast of Mame and the original cast of Fiddler on the Roof and the original cast of West Side Story and Hello Dolly, everything. So I was surrounded by this stuff. I've only gotten to do Hello Dolly once. I played Rudi the Headwaiter at the Harmonia Gardens with down in Florida with wonderful Michelle Ragusa, and who was fantastic. And our Horace was Adam Heller, who many people may know as Beth Level's hubby.
Mhm.
And it is just, but I'm a big fan of Thornton Wilder. If I were hard pressed to give what I think is the quintessential American play of the 20th century, I'd say Our Town. Our Town is a metaphor for life. Thornton Wilder, was part of that a bunch of guys who came out the other side of World War I and survived it, and didn't become disillusioned with life, but rather started saying, what does it mean to be alive, and how do we celebrate life and living and the passage of life and moving through the chapters of our lives. And the matchmaker upon which this is based is really it's exactly what Richard is living, this meta.
I know.
Hello, Dolly. He's coming back, I just did my own cabaret comeback after 20 years and away from it. And, I was joking. I went away from the lights of 14th Street. I think all of us of a certain age, we find ourselves having to reinvent ourselves, or at least to create new stages for ourselves to step out upon. And we come with the wisdom of time and experience, especially in show business. So Richard's bringing all of that, but he's also bringing something that I think is sorely lacking in our culture right now, which is joy. Joy. Hello, Dolly is so much about, yes, we want you to succeed, but we also want those two boys to get to the city and find love and not get in trouble with Horace. And we want Horace to shake off the crust, and he needs to get back into life. He needs love. He needs to find joy again. And I think that what Richard's doing, and what I think time will show in the way that he engages with audiences, both here and as he takes this piece out into the world, is a hunger for connection with stories and songs that affirm being alive and finding love and being able to start again. So and Richard and I go way back. I mean, the two of us were being beautiful ladies back in the day, and his carol was definitive, and the fact that he became friends with her. I mean, Lauren Bacall. I used to do Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall did not want to know from me. believe me, I try. But gosh, what Richard's doing is a very difficult thing to do. To do a tribute to a show, to do a tribute to a friend who was the iconic original star without doing her, and to be an authority on something without being pedantic, to taking music through Dan's arrangements and the way that we've all worked on this material as actors in a way. We've all worked on these songs as interpretive rather than tribute. Like I have a hard time defining what the show is, because a lot of people are like, well, what would you say? It is a tribute to Hello, Dolly, but it's more than that. It's a tribute to the things that make people come together in a spirit of joy. And even if it's just 15 people in a library up in Rockland County after an ice storm, like we had the other night, you feel it. You feel it. And that we all want to get back out into the world again, So that's me blathering on and interrupting your party. But I had an audition earlier, and I had to go
part of the party. So thank you.
Yes.
Sure.
And what has the process been like of doing it up until this New York premiere? And I don't know if Rockland County is the only place you've done it out of town, or if you've done it elsewhere.
Well, that was we had our first preview there, and they want us back, so we're going to do another one out there. Wonderful, wonderful, welcoming, lovely space, lovely people. But the process has been Richard going, I want to do this. And I think that's how things happen. I think we are all colleagues. Dan is a genius. I've always wanted to collaborate with him in this way. Just a brilliant musician, and he thinks like an actor. I mean, I think that is key to having somebody who can do this kind of a show. He feels it with you, right? But the process really has been Richard going, I want to do this thing. And he's got so many iterations of it from which we can draw. He's sort of like the TED Talk of musical theater. He's able to sort of hold forth with these amazing, fascinating stories and memories, and to answer people's questions off the cuff, which is a unique part of a live show, a cabaret of this sort. But he also wanted to be pushed out of his comfort zone as an actor and wanted to inhabit this material as Richard. And I am 110% on board with that, because I know what that's like. I know what that's like to have such reverence for, and I don't know what it's like. I mean, I wish I had known Marlene Dietrich. I bet she was a hoot of a person. But you don't want to be too reverent. And I think it's because Carol gave Richard this permission, literally said, go out, do, be you, that Richard's free to do this without an undue sense of reverence, because it can get, what I mean? It's like, there's nothing hokey about Hello, Dolly, unless it is directed as such, or whether it is, unless it's performed as such. If it's done in a hokey way, then it's hokey, I was directed by Jimmy Brennan, who's a wonderful, wonderful stage actor who I'd seen in many, many things. And his approach to it always came from a place of wonder. There's a little coda that comes at the end of Put On Your Sunday Clothes, where everyone's arrived in New York from Yonkers and gotten off the train. And there's a little coda, and it's just a little musical interlude that leads into the scene that comes next. And he created these little stories in our production with these, couples meeting up at the train station for the first time since they've last seen each other, and like mothers trying to gather their children around them so that they don't run off into the crowd. And it all was choreographed and beautifully, seamlessly orchestrated and created this, here we are, we've arrived in New York. That's theater. That's why theater is important. We know that it's been planned. We know that it's been rehearsed. We know that it's been crafted, and yet we buy it. We're in. We're all in. And that's different. That's a different kind of an experience than a film or television or whatever. We all need to get back out and be together and experience theater and take the journey together. And I think that's what Richard is inviting everybody to do with this show. And I just can't wait for people to see it. People are going to be blown away. And he can sing. This man has a voice. Like in this library, we're like, what kind of microphone should we use? We don't need a microphone. Can't wait for people to rediscover Richard's talent. I'm all for it. I think it's great.
It's great. Well, thank you, Richard, James, and Dan. And Richard, I'd love to take a page out of your interviewing book to close out this segment by asking you to give a final word in terms of something that we didn't talk about or that you want to say more about. And that can be how we end today's show, as a celebration of you.
Well, I was hoping you would have the final word, but essentially what I think I'm going to leave it up to a few of the Dollies. One of the things that we celebrate in this show is when I look back over my life, for example, if anyone had ever said, oh, you and Carol will be good friends, I never would have believed it. And the fact that she was always there for me, that when I'll share a story that I don't talk about the show, but when I met Harry, and I'll end with this, and then we'll go into a little clip that I'm going to share. But when I met Harry, Carol was just coming back into performing again as well. And she was doing a series called Singular Sensations. And Singular Sensations was taking place at the Village Gate. And I met Harry that night, and they gave me their card. And he said, call me anytime. And I thought, am I just going to pick up the phone and call them just to talk with them? And I waited until Christmas Day. And when I called Carol, she said, what took you so long? They'd given me the card in October. And until the end of her life, every year on Christmas Day, I would get a phone call from Carol. And she would say, hello, Richard, it's Carol. Carol Channing, I'm your Christmas Carol. And I got that call year after year after year. And then one year on Christmas Day, I didn't get the call. And I panicked. It's like something's happened. Passed away. And right around Christmas time. So I always think of Carol at the holidays, especially Danny's mom, my husband, your mom, and myself. We all share a birthday. And I will never forget the time that Carol called to sing happy birthday to Danny's mom and myself. But the great thing that has come out of everything that I've done with Dolly are the people that I've met. Every person along the way, not only Carol Channing, Leroy Reams, Jerry Herman, and so many others. I hope that all of you will be able to come and be a part of our celebration on February 11th. And if not, keep looking me up, callondolly.com, and you never know where we might show up. Charles, you are the best. And here are a few other Dollys.
The greatest blessing that came out of all the years that I did my show was becoming friends with Carol Channing. And it was Carol's idea that I write a book chronicling Hello Dolly. So I spent years working on this book. Bette Midler comes to Broadway, and Bernadette Peters and Donna Murphy. And I have seen so many Dollys over the years.
And then there was Mary Martin, and then there was Phyllis Diller, and then there was Carol Cook.
And God bless Carol Channing, because she was just one of those great, great stars.
I had such a sense of responsibility to play this role the best way I could, and to honor all the women and men who have played this part over the years.
The one universal theme that I keep getting over and over and over is that it's about life and love and transformation. And I just love this show.
Hello, Sally.